And why is he even here if he can't dress like the rest of us? Rogers's room. He recalled how excited he'd been just last night, telling his mother how proud he was to be selected for that math competition, how he might finally get a shot at a college scholarship down the line. Because Miss Rogers had taken him aside and said, "Jaden, you have a gift with numbers, you see patterns. Most people don't. You keep that up and you'll make it far." And for a moment, as he hovered by the door, he wondered if Miss Rogers would say anything about his shoes, or if she'd just greet him with her usual warm smile and wave him inside, which she did, thankfully, though even she took a quick glance downward at his worn soles. But she didn't comment. She just nodded with that friendly expression, as if to say, "Good morning," so Jaden exhaled and mumbled, "Morning, Miss." Rogers cleared her throat, gave Lamont a pointed look, and said, "All right, class. Let's settle down. We've got a busy day, and for the next 45 minutes, Jaden tried his best to focus on the math problems, Miss. As the bell rang, Miss Rogers motioned for Jaden to stay behind a moment, and he gulped, wondering if he was in trouble. But her face didn't look angry, just concerned, and when the rest of the class filed out, she smiled softly and said, "Jaden, I couldn't help but notice the trouble you had with some of your classmates this morning. I want you to know, if you ever feel uncomfortable or need someone to talk to, my door is always open." And Jaden forced a smile, nodding, not quite able to find the words, so she continued, "I know it's not easy, but trust me, you are one of the brightest students I've seen, and I don't want you to lose sight of that over something as superficial as—" She paused, looking down at his feet, and then back up at him. "Shoes. We can't always control what we have, but we can control who we are and what we do with what we've got." And Jaden cleared his throat and said, "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Miss Rogers." And then she reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a pamphlet, and handed it to him, saying, "I'm recommending you for the advanced track next semester, so make sure you get your parent or guardian to sign this. All right?" "Yo, Jaden," Lamont called out, stretching out his arms in an exaggerated yawn. "You got time to talk about your fashion choices? You too good for us?" Porter, the stern-looking vice principal, with grey hair piled atop her head in a tight bun, strode over and barked, "What's going on here?" in a voice that seemed to rattle the lockers, and the crowd dispersed almost immediately, with Lamont and Marcus stepping back, hands in the air. "Nothing, miss." "Porter, just talking," and Jaden exhaled in relief, thinking maybe he'd dodged another bullet. "And Miss—" Porter eyed him, then eyed Lamont and Marcus, and finally pointed at each one in turn. "I will not tolerate any harassment in this school. Do I make myself clear? If I see any of you causing trouble for each other again, it's detention." And they all nodded rapidly. "Yes, miss." "Porter," they chorused. And the vice principal turned sharply on her heel and marched away, leaving the hallway in tense silence. And Jaden didn't want to linger, so he hurried off to his next class, clutching his backpack straps so tightly his knuckles turned white. And Jaden kept his head down, focusing on the lunch tray in front of him, reminding himself he was here for an education, to make his mother proud, to maybe carve out a better future for himself. But it was so hard to ignore the hateful stares, the sneers, the laughter. He took his tray to the far end of the cafeteria, choosing a small table near the wall, and he sat there quietly, stirring his food without much appetite, wondering if it would be better to just eat in the library or find some hidden corner of the campus where no one would bother him. But as he was about to stand up and leave, he heard a gentle voice say, "Mind if I sit here?" And Jaden huffed a humorless laugh. "Yeah, sure, but that doesn't exactly make it hurt less." And she swallowed, glancing down at his shoes, then back up to his face. "I don't think you deserve that treatment. And I hate that this school is like that, sometimes." And he didn't respond, not sure what to say. So they just sat there in an awkward silence until she asked, did you sign up for the math competition next week?" And Jaden was surprised she knew about that. So he answered, "Yeah, Miss Rogers recommended me," and her eyes lit up a bit. "That's really cool. I heard only a few students got chosen, and you're one of them." And Jaden shrugged. "It's something I like to do." "So," and Stephanie nodded, "I'm sure you'll do great." And before he could muster a reply, a loud voice rang out across the cafeteria. "Yo, Steph, why are you sitting with him?" And they both turned to see Lamont standing at the other end of the room, arms crossed, glaring, and Stephanie tensed, glancing anxiously at Jaden. "Just talking about math class," she called back, and Lamont scoffed. "Math? Girl, come sit with us." And Jaden sighed, thinking, "Here we go again. He's about to start something." But Stephanie gave Lamont a dismissive wave. "I'm good," she said, and Lamont shook his head. "Suit yourself," and he turned and walked away, but not before giving Jaden an icy stare that promised trouble later. After lunch, Jaden felt exhausted, emotionally drained from constantly being on guard, and when he got to his English class, he sank into his seat and tried to disappear into the background, hoping that maybe he'd get through the afternoon without incident. But halfway through the lesson, the teacher, Mr. Sanders, asked them to break into small groups to discuss a reading assignment, and as fate would have it, Jaden ended up in a group with Marcus and Lamont, who sauntered over and dropped into their chairs with exaggerated smirks. "Hey, new shoe boy," Marcus muttered, and Jaden closed his eyes, inhaling slowly before responding, "Can we just do the assignment?" Rogers's encouragement remembered his mum's words and realized anger would only feed their fire, so he took a deep breath and said, "Look, I don't want any drama, okay? I just want to get through the day like everyone else." And Lamont rolled his eyes, boring, but Marcus, perhaps surprised by Jaden's calm tone, shrugged. "Fine, whatever. Let's just get this over with." So they each took turns reading a sentence from the passage, though neither Marcus nor Lamont were paying much attention. When it came time to share personal examples of empathy, there was a long pause, and Mr. Lamont stared at him for a moment, then shook his head as if to clear it. "Man, that's real," he admitted under his breath, and Marcus just shrugged. "Yeah, well, guess you gotta do what you gotta do," and the tension seemed to loosen just a little, if only for a second, before Mr. Sanders approached, smiling politely. "How's it going, Group 4? And Jaden answered, "We're, doing okay," glancing at Marcus and Lamont to see if they'd contradict him, but they just nodded, and Mr. Sanders chuckled, glad to hear it. "Don't forget to jot down your reflections," and then he moved on. After class ended, Marcus and Lamont left without saying much, and Jaden felt a small sense of relief that it hadn't escalated, but he knew better than to think it was over. The final bell rang at 3:15, and Jaden gathered his things to head home, eager to escape the day's stress. As he walked out the front doors of the school, he heard footsteps behind him and braced himself for another encounter. But when he turned around, it was just Stephanie again, awkwardly clutching her binder to her chest. "Hey, Jaden," she said, looking nervous. Can I talk to you for a second?" And he raised an eyebrow. "Sure," he replied, heart still thumping with residual anxiety. "What's up? You don't seem like you get teased." And she gave a wry smile. "Well, not by Marcus or Lamont, but some of the popular girls do, because they say I'm too tall, or that my clothes are out of style, or I'm too quiet, or whatever reason they have that day." And Jaden gave a small nod. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "People can be cruel." And she shrugged. "It's high school. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know you're not alone." And Jaden felt a surprising warmth in his chest. "Thanks," he managed to say, and she offered him a tiny smile before heading off to catch her bus. Jaden walked home, where he found his mum's car missing from the driveway, which meant she was still at work. So he let himself in, kicked off his ragged shoes by the door, noticing with a twinge of sadness. The sole was coming loose on the left one, and he'd probably have to glue it again soon, or maybe tape it if it got bad. He sighed, tossing his backpack on the couch, and made his way to the kitchen, where he fixed himself a peanut butter sandwich. He ate in silence, replaying the day's events in his head, the laughter, the tension, Miss Rogers's kind words, Stephanie's unexpected friendliness, and after finishing his sandwich, he pulled out the pamphlet Miss Rogers had given him, reading through the advanced track requirements, feeling a spark of hope despite everything else. He decided to start on his homework, so he grabbed his textbooks and settled at the small kitchen table, scribbling out math problems, losing himself in the logic of numbers, which was always a refuge for him, until he heard the jingle of keys in the lock and the front door opened. "Jaden, baby, you home?" called his mother's voice, and he stood up to greet her, seeing the weary lines etched into her face. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, offering her a tired smile. "How was work?" And she sighed, dropping her purse on the counter. "Long, but I'm okay. How was school?" And for a second, Jaden didn't know how to answer. He didn't want to worry her, but he also didn't want to lie, so he just gave a non-committal shrug. It was. "All right," he said, though his tone made it clear it hadn't been that great, so his mom, Harriet, eyed him closely. "Something happen?" The next morning, Jaden woke up earlier than usual, determined to face the day with renewed resolve, reminding himself that he was strong, he was worthy, and a pair of shoes didn't define him. He left the house a little earlier too, hoping to avoid running into Lamont and Marcus. But as luck would have it, they arrived shortly after he did, and Jaden was forced to endure their jibes in the hallway, though they were slightly less enthusiastic about it than before. Perhaps Miss Porter's warning had some effect. "Still rocking those beaters, huh?" Lamont muttered with a dismissive sneer. "Don't you ever get tired of wearing them?" And Jaden just ignored him, walking swiftly to his locker, but Marcus stepped in front of him, blocking the way. "Where you think you're going?" he asked, and Jaden sighed, bracing for another confrontation. But before anything could happen, Miss Porter appeared again, seemingly out of thin air, eyes narrowed. "Gentlemen, do we have a problem?" And Marcus quickly shook his head. "No, ma'am, we're good," stepping aside, and Jaden slipped past, silently grateful for the vice principal's impeccable timing. Classes that day went by relatively smoothly, though Jaden caught the occasional snicker from certain classmates, and by lunchtime he found himself seeking out a place to sit once more. But this time, Stephanie waved him over to her table, and he hesitated, wondering if that would just put more of a target on his back. But seeing her earnest smile, he decided to take a chance. He set his tray down beside hers, ignoring the looks from some of her friends, apparently. They hadn't expected her to invite him, but Stephanie gave them a pointed look. "He's cool, all right," she said, then turned to Jaden. "Want to go over the math competition details after lunch? We can head to the library," and Jaden nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Sure, sounds good," he replied, and as they ate, she asked him a bunch of questions about the competition, what kinds of problems were on it, how he practiced, and Jaden found himself growing excited, talking about something he was passionate about, forgetting for a few minutes the weight of the stairs and the silent judgments around them. However, that respite didn't last long, because just as they were finishing up, Marcus and Lamont strode by, and Lamont leaned over, muttering under his breath, "Gotta see this to believe it," nodding at Jaden and Stephanie, and Marcus sneered, "You think you're special or something, man?" And Jaden's jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to be special. I'm just living," he said evenly. And Marcus rolled his eyes. "Whatever." Then he looked at Stephanie. "You downgrade your status just to hang with him?" And Stephanie fired back. "Stop being such a jerk, Marcus," her voice trembling with anger. "You don't get to decide anyone's status. So get lost." And Marcus, clearly taken aback by her boldness, paused for a moment, sneered again, then turned on his heel, beckoning Lamont to follow. Jaden watched them go, heart thudding. "Thanks," he mumbled, feeling a surge of gratitude, but also guilt that Stephanie had to defend him. And she shrugged. They're not worth it, she said simply. Come on, let's go to the library. And so they did, walking out of the cafeteria together, though Jaden could practically feel the eyes of half the student body burning holes in their backs. After school, Jaden walked home again, deciding to skip the bus because the weather was nice and he needed time to clear his head. He sighed and continued walking, pushing the thought away, reminding himself that material things shouldn't matter so much, though he couldn't deny the desire to fit in, to not be singled out. The next day was Saturday, and true to her word, Harriet took Jaden to the shoe store, where he browsed with wide eyes at all the flashy options, though when he reached for one of the more expensive pairs, Harriet gently put a hand on his shoulder. Let's see if we can find something a bit more affordable, she said, softly, and he nodded, swallowing his disappointment. Eventually, they settled on a pair that was still trendy, but not quite top of the line, and Jaden couldn't help grinning at his reflection in the store's mirror. The crisp, clean look of the new sneakers felt like a fresh start. Harriet took them up to the counter, paying with the extra shift money she'd earned, and Jaden thanked her over and over, promising to help out more around the house, to do whatever he could to lighten her load. That night, Jaden could hardly sleep, imagining walking into school wearing his new shoes, envisioning the looks on Marcus and Lamont's faces, the shift in the way people saw him, and he felt both excited and a little guilty that it mattered so much to him, but he couldn't help it. Monday morning arrived, and Jaden tied his new sneakers with a care and precision that felt almost ceremonial, stepping out the door with renewed confidence, though a small part of him worried that the bullies would just find something else to pick on. As he walked through the school's entrance, he noticed a few heads turning, some eyebrows lifting apparently. People were taking notice, and Jaden tried to keep his posture casual, but inside, he felt a swell of pride. He found his locker and started spinning the combination, when suddenly he heard a scoff behind him. Look who decided to upgrade, Lamont's voice, and Jaden braced himself, turning around slowly, expecting mockery, but Lamont just nodded at the shoes. Nice, he muttered, though his tone was laced with condescension. Guess you finally scrounged up the money, huh? And Jaden felt a flicker of anger. Why do you care? Despite the encounter, Jaden felt a surge of empowerment. He'd stood his ground, and even though the bullies still tried to belittle him, they were running out of ammunition. At lunch, Stephanie immediately noticed his new shoes and smiled. They look great, she said genuinely. I'm glad you got them, and Jaden gave a small smile back. Thanks, my mom took an extra shift, but I told her I'd help out more at home to make up for it, and Stephanie nodded. Well, maybe now people will leave you alone, and Jaden shrugged. Maybe, or maybe not, but he appreciated the gesture. Over the next few days, Jaden did find that some of the snickers and taunts subsided, though Marcus and Lamont remained distant and occasionally threw him dirty looks, as if they resented him for daring to buy shoes that challenged their monopoly on style. Jaden tried to focus on the math competition, which was rapidly approaching, and he spent extra hours after school with Miss Rogers, practicing problem sets, honing his skills, determined to do well and prove himself academically. The morning of the math competition dawned bright and clear, and Jaden arrived at school early, dressed neatly, his new sneakers laced tight, nerves fluttering in his stomach. Miss Rogers greeted him with an encouraging smile. You ready, Jaden? She asked, and he swallowed, nodding. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, clutching his binder full of practice problems. The competition was held in the auditorium, with rows of desks set up on stage, and as Jaden filed in with the other contestants, he spotted Marcus sitting in the audience with a bored expression on his face, probably forced by a teacher to attend, but upon seeing Jaden, Marcus raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Let's see what you got," and Jaden felt an odd mix of anxiety and determination coil in his gut. He took his seat, pencil trembling slightly in his hand, but Miss Rogers, who was one of the monitors, caught his eye from the wings and gave him a thumbs up. The contest began, and the auditorium fell silent, except for the quiet rustling of papers and the scribbling of pencils. Jaden read through each problem carefully, feeling the familiar thrill of unraveling complex equations, losing himself in the logic, the patterns, the strategies he'd practiced. With each problem solved, he felt a surge of confidence, recalling how Miss Rogers had praised his talent, how he'd found solace in numbers since he was a little kid. Time passed in a blur, and before he knew it, the competition was over. They were instructed to put their pencils down, and the judges collected the papers, retreating backstage to grade them, while the participants waited nervously in the auditorium. Jaden's heart thumped as he glanced around at the other students, some looking confident, others biting their nails, and he thought about how far he'd come, how he'd endured laughter and teasing for something as trivial as his shoes. And yet here he was, possibly about to achieve something real and meaningful. After what felt like an eternity, the judges returned, one of them stepping up to the microphone, clearing his throat. "We have the results," he announced. "First, we'd like to congratulate all the participants for their hard work and dedication. Now, for the top 3 scorers." Jaden held his breath, gripping the edge of his seat, heart pounding, so loud he could hear the rush of blood in his ears. "Third place goes to Lily Chang from Westside Academy." Polite applause erupted, and the judge continued, "Second place goes to Rachel Morrison from Lakeview High." More applause. And Jaden's stomach sank a bit. He figured if he didn't place second, maybe he hadn't placed at all. But then the judge smiled broadly. And first place, with a nearly perfect score, goes to Jaden Harris from Kennedy Middle School. The auditorium exploded in cheers, none louder than Miss Rogers's excited whoop from the side, and Jaden sat there in stunned disbelief for a moment before he realized he was supposed to stand up. So he hurried to his feet, face burning with elation, and Miss Rogers rushed over to give him a hug. "I knew you could do it," she exclaimed, beaming with pride, and Jaden felt tears prickling his eyes, because for the first time in a long while, he felt recognized not for what he wore or didn't wear, but for what he could do, for the intelligence inside him, and it was exhilarating. As he walked off stage, trophy in hand, he caught sight of Marcus lingering in the back, wearing a grudgingly impressed expression, and for a moment, Jaden thought Marcus might just turn away and leave. But instead, Marcus slowly walked over, nodding at the trophy. "You really aced that, huh? Congrats." And without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Jaden standing there, feeling a mixture of surprise, relief, and a tiny flicker of empathy, maybe. Marcus had his own struggles that Jaden knew nothing about. As Jaden rode the bus home later that day, he replayed the moment of triumph in his head, the trophy gleaming in his backpack, and his phone buzzing with congratulatory texts from Stephanie, Miss Rogers, and a few other classmates who were genuinely impressed by his win. He felt a new sense of acceptance, of belonging, not because he was wearing new shoes, but because he'd shown what he was capable of, and that was something that couldn't be taken away from him. When he got home, Harriet was there waiting, having taken off work early to hear the results, and when Jaden showed her the trophy, she burst into tears, hugging him so hard he could hardly breathe. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she cried, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you were meant for great things." And Jaden clung to her, tears in his own eyes. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered. "Couldn't have done it without you." And Harriet laughed through her tears. "You're the one who studied, who worked so hard. I'm just here cheering you on." And Jaden smiled, remembering how just a week ago he'd been the boy with the ragged shoes, the object of laughter in the halls, and now he stood with a trophy in hand, recognized and respected for his talent, a reminder that sometimes the best way to silence ridicule is through achievement and unwavering. The next day at school, Jaden walked in with a quiet confidence, his head held high, not because of the shoes, but because of what he'd accomplished. Though he still wore the new sneakers, he was grateful for them. He realized that what truly mattered was what he carried inside, his intellect, his determination, his kindness, and his sense of self-worth. As he passed by the usual crowd, he noticed fewer sneers and more nods of acknowledgement. He found Stephanie waiting by the lockers, a bright smile on her face. "Math champion," she teased, punching his shoulder lightly, and Jaden grinned. "Guilty as charged," he replied, and Marcus, who happened to be retrieving books from a locker nearby, gave Jaden a curt nod. "Nice job," he mumbled, barely meeting Jaden's eyes, but it was something, a step toward civility. Lamont, though less willing to concede, simply stayed quiet, occasionally glancing at Jaden with a contemplative look, but didn't hurl any insults. As the days turned into weeks, Jaden found that the laughter about his shoes had all but disappeared. A few students tried to bring it up again, but it fell flat, overshadowed by his reputation as the school's math star, and more importantly, overshadowed by Jaden's unwavering sense of self. He discovered that once he stopped giving power to their words, once he refused to be ashamed of his circumstances, the bully's hold on him loosened. Miss Rogers continued to mentor him, introducing him to more competitions, challenging him with advanced work, and each small victory reinforced Jaden's belief that he could rise above the pettiness and cruelty. And at home, Harriet's relief was palpable, seeing her son grow more confident day by day, though she still worked tirelessly, determined to provide him every opportunity possible. One afternoon, Jaden decided to do something he'd never thought he'd do. He approached Marcus in the cafeteria, carrying an extra milk carton, and offered it to him with a tentative smile. Marcus looked confused. "What's this for?" he asked, and Jaden shrugged. "I grabbed two by accident," he lied. "Figured you might want one." And Marcus hesitated before taking it. "Thanks," he said, awkwardly, and Jaden nodded. "No problem." And for a brief moment, there was a sense of mutual understanding that neither boy spoke aloud but both could feel. As the school year continued, Jaden learned that acceptance and understanding had more power than retaliation or anger, and though not everyone in the school became his friend, the blatant harassment diminished significantly, replaced by a cautious respect. One morning, Jaden walked into Miss Rogers's class to find a note on his desk, reading, "Keep being you, someone's watching and inspired," and he never found out who wrote it, but it warmed his heart, reminding him that our actions, our courage in the face of adversity, can quietly touch lives we may not even realize are watching. By the end of the year, Jaden had gathered a stack of certificates from math competitions, a growing circle of supportive friends, and a stronger relationship with his mother. Marcus and Lamont no longer targeted him, and while they weren't exactly best friends, there was a cordial nod in the hallway, an unspoken agreement to coexist without hostility. Stephanie remained a close ally, even joining the math club as a supportive member, finding her own passion for data analytics and problem solving, grateful that Jaden had introduced her to a new world of intellectual challenge. And Jaden discovered a deeper truth, that the most profound validation doesn't come from the brand of shoes on your feet, but from what you achieve when you believe in yourself, from the kindness you extend to others, and from the inner fortitude that refuses to let ridicule break you. Though the memory of that first day's laughter still stung, it served as a reminder of how far he'd come, and how a single act of perseverance can redefine people's perceptions. Years later, Jaden would look back on this chapter of his life, when writing his college essays, recalling how he'd been teased and mocked, how he'd triumphed in the math competition, and how that experience shaped him into the resilient, empathetic person he'd become. He'd remember the day he got those new shoes, how excited he felt, but also how he realized the shoes themselves weren't the real victory, merely a symbol of a greater journey towards self-acceptance. And in time, those scuffed and worn sneakers, eventually outgrown, became a poignant keepsake, a testament to the challenges he overcame.